Good morning, good afternoon for all of those joining us from all over the world. My name is Maggie Omotesi, and we are delighted to have you with us this morning on our roundtable discussion where we'll be engaging with the media on Africa's role at the G20. Now, Africa's permanent seat presents more than just a significant, rather just the presence, but also there is so much more that the continent hopes from getting from that milestone. Now, at this particular time, midway of South Africa's G20 presidents, and with a lot of shifts in the global financial and multilateral landscape, we are exploring a conversation on how AU's permanent seat at the G20 could shift from just presence to tangible results for the continent, looking into climate financing, but also increasing Africa's visibility and presence on the global stage. As part of our discussion today, we will be having panelists that have co-authored policy briefs and research with concrete recommendations and some of takeaways that Africa can draw from in increasing its visibility at the G20, but also more so on how it can engage more with development partners, African governments, and other players globally to strengthen the continent's presence. My role today will be just to bring your questions to our panelists, but also make sure that the conversation goes, flows to the direction that you are able to understand beyond just the reports what more could be there that Africa could do. At this particular moment, I just want to give you some guidelines and house rules. We have translation from English to French and vice versa, so you can feel free to choose a language that you like. We also will have our speakers, but the conversation is about you, so we will be taking in questions later. Feel free to raise your hand or leave a question in the Q&A. Our team will be able to take that up and direct it to us. And also later on, we'll be launching 2 reports about Africa's position at the G20. One, the AU in the G20 from presence to influence, which is co-authored by GHS and other AU representatives. Now, this report outlines policy, governance, and institutional reforms, including a permanent G20 Secretariat and enhanced alignment to strengthen Africa's positioning. We also have an AfriCatalyst policy brief on maximizing Africa's influence in the G20, which offers targeted policy recommendations around debt reform, climate adaptation, finance, inclusive digital infrastructure, and sustainable health systems. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists. We have Dr. Hamady Diop. He's the Senior Advisor to the African Union Special Envoy on the Food Systems. We also have Alvin Munyasia, who is the Climate Fellow at African Group of Negotiators Expert Support. And we have Ms. Amara Ekaruche, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Dr. Hamady, I would like to bring you in to help us set the stage on the policy brief authored by AfriCatalyst. You make some recommendations, especially when it comes to dates, but could you just give us an idea on some of the concrete recommendations you point out? Also bearing in mind that Africa is currently actually doing a lot in terms of engaging, especially with its seat, but what more could be done to strengthen that from just presence to tangible results?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Let me maybe just give a little bit of background on the G20. So first, backward 2 terms during the presidency of India, African Union was offered the opportunity to have a permanent seat at the G20. It was an oddity that was corrected because European Union is a member of the G20, and we are a continent of 1.2 billion. We were an observer, which was very weird. So that was basically the major shift in the global governance in terms of economic impact. The G20 coordinate global macroeconomic stability and crisis management. They shape financial governance reform at the global level, whether it's the IMF or World Bank. They advance sustainable development issue on climate, on health, on digitalization, on trade, and the list goes on and on and on. And then also they serve as a policy coordination platform. So given this importance, Africa was not sitting there. So we were just being invited to be an observer. We were not part of the conversation. We cannot vote. We cannot change the global agenda. So now we have a new opportunity since the presidency of India to have a seat on the table. But having a seat at the table also comes with a lot of responsibilities. We just cannot continue to go and attend different meetings and not push our own agenda. So the governance of the G20 is very complex. So you have basically two tracks. You have what they call the Sherpa track and you have the financial track. So the Sherpa track is the one that set up basically the agenda for the head of state. The financial one is the one that discuss some of the issues. But those two tracks are supported by working groups. And then you have engagement groups. And those engagement groups really cover a big spectrum. You have an engagement group with businesses. You have an engagement group with a civil society organization. You have an engagement group with a think tank. You have an engagement group with foundation, and the list goes on. You have about 20 of them. And then you have presidencies that rotate on an annual basis. And then the decision is made by a consensus. So this year we have the opportunity that the presidency is within the hand of South Africa. So when we were working on this policy brief, we realized that we don't have the luxury to be distracted and to try to do everything in the short run. So we have to pick up maybe 3 or 4 priorities and at least focus on them in the shorter run. The first priority, in my view, is we need to bring the two track to align them. So the ministers of finance and the ministers of foreign affairs, when they go to those meetings, from the Sherpa track or from the finance track, they need to be speaking the same language. One track cannot come to the G20 and push for one agenda and the other one push for the other agenda. And this has been observed in some cases because Europeans also used to do that, but they learn from that experiment and they align their views. So we need to start discussing and pushing our agenda with one voice. The number 2, to be able to develop a one voice, you need to prepare for it. How do you prepare for it? You need to have dedicated technical working group that are supported by our centers of excellency that continue to do those policy positions. AfriCatalyst could be one of them, for example, because you have designed those policy briefs, for example, and then you are shared them with the African Union, and the African Union can use basically some of the recommendation to push them through the G20. So that's the second recommendation I can see. But for us to speak with one voice and develop basically evidence-based position and policy, we need to have a coordination mechanism. And that coordination mechanism could be ensured by a secretariat. So we need to have a dedicated secretariat at the African Union that basically monitor the day-to-day issue, making sure that we're developing the relevant policies that will be channeled through some of those technical working groups, and also making sure that the feedback from those technical working group also will go to the country for implementation. Lastly, in terms of prioritization, in the short run, I can see really Africa working on issue of climate, because climate issues are impacting the continent. The issue of health, we have seen the COVID-19, how the COVID-19 has shown how fragile our logistics are. We can also focus on the issue of trade. Trade is impacting the continent left and right. We don't have common, we do have common standard, we don't implement them. At the global level, some, like the European Union, are using, for example, the standard to basically protect their market and prevent our commodity to come to Europe. We are now about 1.25 billion. It took Europe like 150 years to double its population. Our population is going to double in the next 30 years. So it means, in a simplified language, that in the next 30 years, we will have at least 1.2 billion people to feed. And if we don't protect our market and try to produce what we eat, it's going to be a big challenge in terms of trade. So the last one is the issue of digitalization. Now we're talking about Internet of Things, we're talking about AI. So we need also to have a skin in the game. There was the issue of data privacy, etc., etc. So those are the four maybe major areas that I see as prioritizing in the short run. So in the document that we have basically mapped out a timeline. That document, we consider it as a document that should not be circulating widely, because once you put it out there, people who want to detract our policies can also develop countermeasure to distract us. So there is a very lengthy document where we looked at what Africa can do in the shorter run, in the medium run, and in the longer run, moving from these four priorities to maybe more basically inclusive and comprehensive priorities. So now, there was some experiment that we did in the continent that have worked. Some of the experiments speaks to, for example, Zambia has used some of the policies of the G20 to restructure its debt. And it has worked. You look at the example of Kenya on digitalization, you look at M-Pesa, is something that is now the envy of even the Western world in terms of digitalizations. That also can be an example that we can scale at the continent and use it as a basically in terms of development infrastructure, use it to influence the G20, and also ask maybe some support in terms of expansion of those models in the continent in terms of financial inclusion and digital infrastructure. There were also some policies that South Africa has put in place. They call it the just transition policies, and they use it to tap into the global climate finance. So that's also something that we can piggyback on and see also how we can take it to action. Now, let me maybe share maybe 2 or 3 things on the achievement, just to have like a more comprehensive view on the G20. So during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, the G20 coordinated what they call a stimulus that helped to create like basically a financial stability across the globe. And those are the issues that we can influence to see how those can benefit the continent. During the COVID-19, there were a suspension of what they call the debt service initiative. So this basically benefited maybe about 40 low-income countries, and many of them were Africa. So it basically put a pause on the debt reimbursement. It gave a fiscal space to African countries to move some of the resources that they were using to reimburse their debt to maybe some development priorities. So that was a very, very concrete success story. There were also a lot of things that comes out of the G20 that influence the global agenda on climate energy transition, on tax revenue, on food security and social protection, on multilateral development initiative, on trade and digital standards. So I don't want to go too much into the details, but for the sake of time, let me just stop here for now and hand over basically the floor back to Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamadi. You've set the stage very clear for us, and you know, sharing also some of the case studies and success stories, I think gives us, you know, a perspective as we get into the discussion. And this report is already out, or the policy brief. The team will be sharing some of these in the inbox, but we'll also launch it at the end of this discussion. I saw a couple of hands up as you were speaking. I wanted to remind our attendees that we will take a round of questions after all our three speakers give context. But in the meantime, you can leave a question in the Q&A. We'll be able to read out. I also saw Ms. Amara, you know, nodding her, you know, agreeing to most of the points you mentioned, you know, which is, you know, not usual to have consensus. But Amara, I want to bring you in and, you know, so considering that you do a lot of work, you know, writing and advocacy around with your platform. Now, as Dr. Hamadi was also speaking, he kept on mentioning, you know, one of the biggest challenges is the coordination. We don't have a one voice. And, you know, the recommendation is governments should speak as a one voice to the AU. But still, as the commitments of the G20 are being made, it doesn't really mean that they translate into domestic policy reforms or budget, does it? And I just want you to give us more context on, you know, beyond the G20, how do we really bring this to our domestic reforms within our regions, countries? Africa is also a diverse continent. And even though some recommendations and reforms that would work for Nigeria might not be able to work for example, Kenya. So just give us much more context on how this could be translated domestically.
Okay. So first off, thank you to the organizers for the invitation. Really great to be here. 2 points I want to make first before delving into the granular aspects of progress by African countries. First point is that the G20 is a great platform for African countries to come together and advocate for international reforms, right? Basically influencing or introducing African perspectives to reforms that affect, you know, the world. One will definitely be multilateral development bank reforms. Another one will definitely be reforms on the common framework. When Hamadi was speaking, he talked about how Zambia has been able to get debt relief. Yes, but that debt relief took 3.5 years because of issues around comparability of treatment, right? So that's one aspect that the continents can or should, you know, make more progress. The second aspect is on elevating our voices when it comes to African or homegrown solutions, right? Solutions such as debt for climate swaps. Recently, Cote d'Ivoire had a debt for climate swap initiative that was successful. Solutions such as sustainability linked bonds, whether it's green bonds or blue bonds, but borrowing not for the sake of borrowing, but borrowing linked to the sustainability agenda. Also, solutions such as carbon swaps, right? So those are the 2 points that I want to, I would like to put forward with regards to Africa's influence, or Africa's, influence at the G20. Now, going deeper into the granular aspects, what can African countries do? Where do they have some form of, influence in terms of domestic issues, right? The first point here will definitely be value chain addition. Value addition in terms of critical minerals, in terms of green minerals, basically minerals that are necessary for both the digital and energy transition, right? So whereas in the 80s, 70s, we saw a lot of, a lot of our minerals being exported, right, out of the continent, particularly for oil. We saw that happen. Our minerals were exported outside of the continent. It would be great if we do not make the same mistake again with this new crop of minerals, whether it's lithium, cobalt, minerals that are necessary for the next industrial revolution, as they would put it. So have these minerals refined on the continent and ensure that local businesses participate such that technology can be shared, knowledge can be shared. That's one point. The second point will definitely be on corporate tax. There is a movement now. It was the discussions were heard at the UN, where multinational corporations will now be taxed as a global entity. So, for instance, you're no longer taxing Google Ghana or Google Nigeria or Google US. You're taxing Google as a global entity. So that way, it limits profit shifting, right? And then you're taxing companies as a global entity, and you're also enforcing a global minimum corporate tax. Right now, it's at 15%, but hopefully the tax rate can increase, right? That way, African countries and Africans share from the profits of global companies. Companies that also, get some form of, a good share of their profits from Africans, right? So those would be my, those are my two recommendations for African governments in terms of what they can do on the continent and areas where they have some form of control.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amara. And I think it builds on to Dr. Amadi and gives us more perspective. But I want to bring in Alvin to build on that. And the G20 in the past has also really, this is a critical moment for Africa because there's the AU having a permanent seat, but also South Africa has the G20 president. So we've had such a key moment to at least push for some reforms that are very close to the continent. That's why there's been a lot of conversations around reducing the cost of capital for African countries and etc. But every year, also, we have different countries that host the G20 with different priorities. And I think next year is the US, I'm not sure, so they will have different priorities. And that's why I want to bring in Alvin in context in conversations like this where, the G20 or Africa's presence is also might also be influenced by whoever is hosting the presidents at the time. Conversations like climate financing remains very severely critical and also inadequate. What severe shifts are needed, especially in the climate finance agenda, to ensure African adaptation priorities are funded, but also you can also give us your understanding on how the continent can plug in these conversations with the AU representation.
Thank you, Maggie, and colleagues Hamati and Ma for the insights. And I want to remind us of the AU theme of the year 2025 on justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparation. And based on what my colleagues have brought to the fore and the African seat in the G20 and South Africa's presidency, it means that as a continent, how could we strategically position the African continent in the evolving geopolitical context? How can we advance tangible and measurable actions in the politics of climate, including climate finance? This media briefing is happening at a critical time when the African continent will be convening for the Africa Climate Summit 2. And my colleagues have spoken about coordination. Is there a mechanism, or rather a platform, that has provided the AU, including those in the G20 presidency, as well as in our permanent seat, to launch a Pan-African reparation agenda linking our seat or our influence in G20 to climate justice, economic justice, historical redress in the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities in order for us to promote our global recognition of Africa's climate debt owed by the global north, grounded in historical emissions and extractive colonial legacies, what my colleagues have been speaking about on the financial architecture and the call for a mechanism that could sort of provide debt cancellation and financing mechanisms that would ensure resources trickle down to those that need it. Maggie, colleagues, these geopolitical realignments, the climate emergency, Hamadi spoke about technological innovations, the demographic shifts. I don't want to call it demographic dividends because the bulge in the youth population in Africa could be anything. It could be a time boom. We can only call it a dividend if we have invested in these young people and ensured that they are part of the table in redefining international cooperation. For me, the G20, therefore, must serve as a continental platform for repositioning Africa as a strategic actor in shaping the global climate and development agenda. And Hamadi spoke about trade. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. I don't know how the conversation would link into this and the issue of climate finance in order to position the AfCTA as a vehicle for driving climate resilient industrialization and clean energy trade, align regional economic communities with Africa's objectives or Africa's common position that is defined by the AGN to ensure policy coherence and resource pooling in order to put to the fore strategies that are critical for adaptation strategies as defined in the national adaptation plans by member states. Ma spoke about critical minerals, beneficiation, how can we benefit from critical minerals and green value chains and contribute to climate smart agriculture. So for me, Maggie, we must define Africa's strategic allies and adversaries and reposition adaptation as a priority, and which has always been a priority, not to mention that mitigation is not, but give it the political attention that it deserves. And the G20 should propose a continent-wide definition of climate finance based on the need, equity, and justice, and collectively reject greenwashing and the commodification of climate solutions. I, as a community voice, would always insist on finance that respects common but differentiated responsibilities, that is guided by the principles of transitional justice, and ensure climate finance is accessible, flexible, and suited to African systems of governance and delivery. So with that, we know the commitments that have been made, and as Africa communities and civil society organization, we are demanding for clear timelines and accountability mechanisms for developed countries to meet and exceed their pledge and mobilize at least 300 billion per year by 2035 for climate action, commit to a fast-track revision of the new collective quantified goal by 2030, and agree on a new target of 1.3 trillion annually by 2030, with a minimum threshold for public grant-based financing. I will leave it at that, and be happy to provide more insights as we continue to converse. And over back to you, Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvin. And I think even though I want to say, Dr. Ahmad, it looks like there's so much more work to do in terms of, coming up with probably more frameworks that we can work with. I know we have not limited time, but we have journalists that we want to bring in to ask some of the questions. I would love to see if there are any hands up and any journalists that would like to ask questions to our speakers. But as you put your hand up, I would also love to emphasize that I know you're passionate and I understand you have burning questions, but let's try to be respectful as we ask our speakers. And I think I will upgrade one of the speakers. Can you, Director, could you bring for me Naftali? Okay, she's in. I think we can unmute her to ask.
Yes. Can you hear me, Maggie?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. I want to direct my question to Hamadi Diop. Naftali is my name. I come from Kenya. I'm a Kenyan journalist, but I work for Xinhua News Agency, that Chinese state news agency. My question to Hamadi is this. Do you envision this continent having a very structured engagement with the G20 and an engagement that can bring fruits for our communities here, especially in the areas of climate finance, in the areas of a more equitable and fairer trading regime, and even the reform of the global financial architecture itself that most of our presidents here have been talking about?
Thank you, Naftali. Dr. Hamadi, before I bring you in, we have one more question from Omar Ba so that we'll take two questions at a time. I think we can now upgrade Omar Ba. And Omar, you can go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please state your name and which media house you work for. We can hear you, Omar.
I am Omar Ba, a journalist from the Gambia. I work with the Standard newspaper, one of the leading newspapers in the country. My question is with regards to the role that African journalists can play to push this agenda. Of course, there has been a lot of talks about it at the top, but at the grassroots, the media has not, it has not been that, frequent in our front pages. So what role do you think the African media can play in pushing this agenda for Africa at the UN?
Thank you, Omar. I think Ms. Amara can direct that to you. we can let Omar go, but I think we can take 2 questions now. We'll come back and take other questions. Dr. Amadi, I'll open it up to you, and then I'll open it up to Ms. Amara. Hello? Dr. Amadi? I think you are on mute. I think you're on mute. I will let you answer the first question and let Ms. Amara answer the second question on how the role media can play. And then we have a third question that I'll direct to Alvin after maybe you give us the answers.
No, sure. I think the question that was addressed to me is, do we envision a structured engagement with the G20 that can bear fruits in the longer term? Let me maybe take off my hat as a panelist and speak from a position of knowledge as a previous staff of the African Union. If you look at the COP28, that was a preparatory meeting was hosted by the government of Kenya. I'm using this example because the journalist who raised the question is from Kenya, I'm assuming. So the African Union had a meeting in Kenya to validate an African position. I saw on the chat that someone mentioning that we are 55, we are not homogeneous. I completely agree that we are not homogeneous. But even with our differences, we can find a consensus around certain issue that we can push at the global level. So during the climate summit in Paris, we started including agriculture issue into the climate discussions. But it was not something that we won as a continent. But when we went to Dubai, my colleague here, Alvin, had been talking about climate finance. I can stay here for the rest of the webinar to talk about issue on agriculture, because the two were seen in silo at the global level. But during the COP28, the two agendas start to merge. Why they are merging? Because of the common position that the African Union pushed during that COP28. So we can come as one and push for one agenda item so that that agenda item will become our priority. I feel very uncomfortable that we are 1.2 billion people, and you have like the European Union that is about 300 million or 400 million. They can develop a position and push it on us, and then people are telling us that we cannot also develop our own position, push it at the global level. I think we need to be very careful about what we put out there. So Africa now is mature to push for common position. I'll give you another example. Before we go to the global level to seek for position to lead UN agencies, and we were always going fragmented. But over the last few years, before we take someone as a candidate to the international organization, we take it through the AU process. That's how we got the World Health Organization General Secretary. That's how we got the WTO, because we take it through the AU processes. Because as 55 countries, if we speak with one voice, we support one candidate, we always win. So we started now realizing that we can develop common positions and we can push them at the global level, and we're getting results. So nothing will prevent us also to go on economic issues on trade issues, on health issues, to develop our position and to say these are our needs, this is what we want, and this is what we're going to push at the global level. So let me just stop here for now, for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamadi. And I just want to build on that one of the reasons we are also having this discussion is to break down these issues for the media, because we understand the importance and the role the media really has to play in simplifying the knowledge that is out there, but also giving the visibility of Africa's position at the G20. And that's why we're having this media briefing, because it's very critical. And like you said, if 400, 300, a continent can do it, Africa with its billions, we can get our voice heard beyond just even the G20, but also with engaging with you. That's why.
Yes.
Exactly. And I want to bring in Ms. Amara to build onto that, on the role that the journalists have to play and the media.
Okay, so first off, thank you, Umar, for that question. Very relevant question. I want to start off by talking about how important the media is in terms of developments, right? So correct reporting by the media has the ability to raise public discourse. Correct reporting by the media keeps the government accountable. Correct reporting by the media builds institutional memory, right? You can start off with reporting success stories. So on the global financial architecture front, we have the AU leading the establishment of a credit rating agency. I think it's it should begin operations in September, which is in a couple of days. We also have a lot of progress on African financial institutions. So an African Financial Corporation, an African Central Bank, an African Investment Bank. This is in addition to other African-based financial institutions like Afri-Exim Bank, African Financial Corporation, and what have you, AFDB, right? So that's one point. Another point is yes, we're 54 countries, but on certain issues, we have an agreement, right? So, for instance, an issue like value addition, I don't think there is any African country that doesn't agree that value should be added on our minerals, right? Another issue is the reform of the global financial architecture, whether it has to do with the common framework, whether it has to do with the MDB reforms in terms of improving lending capacity, in terms of increasing the voting shares of Africans. We all agree that, African voices should be heard better. Other issues as well, such as the reform of the debt sustainability analysis in terms of adequately analyzing the unique risks that African countries face, whether as commodity exporters, as more or less price takers in the capital markets. We all agree or most of us agree that the DSA should be reformed to include African perspectives. On climate finance as well, a lot of us agree that climate finance should, as much as possible, not be loan-based, because the climate situation wasn't even caused by African countries in the first place, right? So we shouldn't suffer or, we shouldn't take on too much of the burden, right? Also, in terms of tax, we agree the success story that at the UN was led by Nigeria and also South Africa in terms of taxing multinationals as a global entity, right? So we also agree on that front. I say all this to say that if you're proactive and you search on the African Union website or the websites of civil society organizations like Afrodad, or the websites of think tanks, Assets in Ghana, the think tank I work with, CC in Nigeria, SIA in South Africa, Kipra in Kenya, right? There is so much information worth reporting to the public, to policymakers, to, you know, all the relevant stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amara. I know we have a few other hands up, but if you're done asking your question, please take the hand down and then we'll bring in others. Alvin, would you like to weigh in on some of the questions asked? I also know we have a question in the chat. She says, my name is Rachel Abuja, a public health journalist with news agency in Nigeria. My question is, how will Africa ensure its G20 seat translates into concrete policy influence or debt relief, climate action, and global financial reforms rather than remaining symbolic? And I think this is why we're having this discussion today. But Alvin, I'll just bring you in to weigh in on some of the questions that have been raised as we upgrade some of the other journalists. If you have a question to ask, please put your hand up and we'll bring you in to ask it.
Yeah, I'll start with the last question on the role of Africa in ensuring that our seat at the G20 moves from policy to practice, if I got it okay. In my view, the evolving global order demands clarity. So within the Africa Union and regional economic blocs, as an African continent, we need a principled approach to global alignment by identifying allies, even within the G20, who are committed to multilateralism, climate justice, Africa's development sovereignty, and African interests, you know, and those that beyond the African space can help the African continent geopolitically leverage policies that work for the communities that we serve. As Dr. Hamade spoke about the Africa Climate Summit 1, and I spoke about the Africa Climate Summit 2 being convened by the government of Ethiopia, creating a continental climate diplomacy framework that articulates Africa's red lines, non-negotiables, and conditions for cooperation, and using its collective voice within the UNFCCC processes and other frameworks like the Sendai framework and UNCCD frameworks that speak into these issues, the G20, BRICS, World Trade Organization, IMF, and World Bank, to push for transformative reforms, which comes to the recommendations by AfriCatalyst. We need to consolidate our coordination mechanism to deliver more effectively and mobilize financing that and ODA and other resources, including technology transfer, that would work for the African continent and African communities. In terms of what journalists can do and what the media can do, is that we need to work together to reframe Africa's global narrative. Africa's story must no longer be told by others, and we must come together as journalists to commit to a powerful narrative shift, one that centers the African continent as a site of climate solutions, innovation, and leadership. We must get away from victimhood framing and highlight resilience, stories, ingenuity, and solidarity, building public diplomatic capabilities across the continent to project this narrative in global media, diplomacy, and policy-making spaces, like what we do with global health strategies within the Leading African Voices initiative. And that brings together all kinds of diverse people to promote the intellectual, cultural, and scientific, including indigenous contributions of African people to the planetary well-being. Maggie.
Thank you very much, Arvin, and for the insights. And I think journalists, we have, and I think beyond even journalists, it's a one voice. We have a responsibility to not only be accurate, but also seek the information to be able to tell it to our audiences. I also want to mention that for those that might have questions in French, please feel free to ask. We'll open up another round of questions. You can put your hand up if you have a question to ask, and we'll bring you in to raise your question or your input. Could we kindly upgrade Brian Kiwani? Brian, go ahead and ask your question.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Kiwana from Zimbabwe. I am a freelance journalist and a media lecturer. My question is, it's so interesting that it's one of the topics that I am researching. So I wanted to say, as the media, how then can we push for the embrace of indigenous knowledge systems that we have country by country in trying to shape up policies for the African continent in an attempt to come up with solutions or ways of adaptation to climate change? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Arvin, do you want to take this first? I'll open up to all the panelists.
Brian, can you ask again?
Brian?
How best can we help or push for the embrace of indigenous knowledge systems that we have? I know they differ from country to country, but for a policy that will then guide this embrace for the African continent, in an effort to come up with solutions or ways of adaptation, how can the media be in a position to push for the embrace of IKS?
Yeah, indigenous knowledge has been an interesting discussion within the climate adaptation space. And what we have been pushing is how can we have a policy environment backed up with a political will to support the most vulnerable in responding to the impact of climate change by embedding indigenous knowledge, community expertise into climate resilient adaptation plans. This can be done through promoting synergies at global level, of course, among conventions in policy and research, investing in research and development that would effectively, as you said, pursue thematic targets based on where these communities are based and avoid maladaptation, as well as fully ensuring that the key sectors within the adaptation framework are considered in terms of the uptake of this kind of knowledge, that is water, food, agriculture, health, and all that. So from my end, vulnerable population, communities living in rural areas must be, on the decision table and contribute into resilient programs that respond to the impacts of climate change. In terms of the different kind of policies, we do have the CADEP framework through the Kampala Declaration that has repositioned mostly adaptation sectors in mobilizing domestic resource mobilization internally, where national governments are supposed to budget for local communities, and for example, to say 10% of their national budgets should go into agriculture, and most importantly, to scale up, sources of finance for adaptation, extension services, working with local communities and rural farmers where they are, in order to have an appropriate deployment of the full range of capacity, finance, and skills that are needed for such innovative ways of responding to the impacts of climate change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, Brian, Dr. Madu, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, sure, rapidly, just to thank Alvin for bringing the issue of CADEP, which, by the way, I coordinated the whole process until the adoption of the declaration by the head of state. Maybe I will not address this specific topic, but what I would like to do is to bring us back to some of the issue Emma raised, and also Alvin raised at the beginning, looking at the theme of the year of the African Union. And just say that the presidency of South Africa is completely aligned to the theme of the year, because the presidency of South Africa is looking at solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So they have prioritized for the continent this year about 7 or 8 different thematic issues. One of them was on inclusive economic growth, job, and industrialization. So this is what they have been pushing through the different working groups, try to basically push the agenda of reindustrialization. As many of us know, at the independence of many countries, we still have a bare minimum of industries that existed. Over time, we have lost most of those industries. And we have basically given up even some of our productive sectors, and we are now more import-oriented than domestic development oriented. So the South African basically leadership to the G20 this year, they have been trying to push that agenda in the global discussion, the issue of reindustrialization, youth employment, medium, small and micro enterprise financing. The second thematic issue the South Africa has been pushing is the issue of food security and agricultural resilience. So they have been positioning the issue of food basket approach, the CADEP experience into also the global agenda, because also at the global level, I mean at the continental level, based on what I said early on, we spending about 50 billion a year, 50 to 90 billion a year just to import food now. So we need to reverse that trend, because in the next 30 years, we'll have 1.2 billion additional mouths to feed. If we don't reverse that trend, you know what's going to happen in terms of disruption. The other area also South Africa has been pushing is some of the discussion that we have had already. So is the issue of debt sustainability for low-income economies. So that also has been a priority for South Africa as a member of the G20, not the African continent. I'm talking about South Africa because there is a question that was raised. Okay, what South Africa has done to benefit the continent? So at least these are major agenda issues that South Africa is pushing into the global agenda so that it can be prioritized, it can be sustained, it can be financed. There is an issue also and I mentioned it already, the just energy transition for climate, where South Africa is pushing the agenda of climate sustainability to different working groups and trying to push basically for reform at the global level. The issue raised by my sister Emma on critical mineral resource governance. So South Africa also has been pushing for the promotion of fair value chain and beneficiation in Africa on those critical minerals. I mean, people have been discussing at the moment. If you look at basically the Southern Africa, there is a lot of interest in what they call the Lupito corridor, where people are pushing for a lot of But all these things, we should not fool ourselves, is linked to those minerals in the Southern Africa. So there is also a push by South Africa on how to leverage digital transformation on AI. So they have been pushing it also through that platform to get prioritization by at the global level on African priorities. So the issue of disaster resilience and response also has been also one of the themes that basically South Africa has been pushing for. So these are basically, in a nutshell, what South Africa has been pushing at the global level. They are not doing it because they felt these are the priority of South Africa, but they felt that these are the things that can benefit the continent as a whole. So I think the journalist role, as Alvin puts it like very nicely, should help basically the African uh, develop its own narrative. Because these things that South Africa is pushing or the African Union is pushing, sometimes is lost in translation because people will feel like, okay, well, we're not doing anything, nothing is benefiting the continent, there is no impact. But if you look at, for example, during COVID, uh, everybody was saying that Africa will be wiped out of the globe because of COVID. But the African Union put in place what they call the Center for Disease Control. They developed like a common position. They push for a global reform, and then basically they lock the continent. So while people were having issues in some other part, based on even the way we live in the continent, the impacts of COVID in the continent was not as bad as people were expecting. So that narrative, those kind of narrative, positive narrative, should be basically taken into consideration by the journalists so that they can advocate for our position, for our values, for our priorities, and also this will help shape basically the global narrative in terms of what Africa is. I am sitting in US here. I'm connected from Washington, D.C. Sometimes when I look at the news here, it's very depressing because what I see here is only negative things about the continent. And so I'm saying, okay, is it my responsibility that the narrative is not positive, or is it also the responsibility of some of our journalists who also are not supporting the development of a positive narrative that we can put out there? So anyway, I don't want to finger point, but I think this is a good platform for us to discuss, then to exchange ideas. I would love, for example, to hear from the colleagues who put the first comment on the chat, to hear his views. I mean, he's saying that no impact on African on the street, the small scale traders, unemployed, and the UNFCC. So he's saying it. I want to hear his views, because maybe also his views can help me maybe to rethink the way I see things, and maybe to reposition, so that it can be a dialogue for a good exchange of ideas, and so that we together we can start developing a common narrative that that will be beneficial to the continent. So this is maybe my 2 cents that I want to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamadi. So we have very limited time. We would have wanted to have this the whole day, especially engaging with the media, considering also there's such a critical voice in advancing Africa's development agenda. We will take one question, but as we get that question, I just wanted to leave this to you in closing as we get to the end of this discussion. And I'm asking, as a journalist, in my previous life as well, what does success look like with AU at the G20? Let's look 5 to 10 years. If I am a journalist somewhere and I'm looking at the journalist asked from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Kenya, Gambia, if I'm sitting in one of these countries and this is a topic you've got me to really like and I want to inform my people, what would success look like to you in that particular time? And where do I pick it up as a journalist to inform the story? Now, I'm not sure if we have any question from the journalists as we close, but we will be happy to take one more question. So feel free to let us know, and then we can let our panelists answer that. But in the meantime, I can open this to Ms. Amara, Alvin, and Dr. Hamadi.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of a development finance expert. I'm sure the climate experts will have a, different version of what success would look like. For me, it would be improved data. We have good data so far on the volume of debts that African governments, have taken on, but more work can be done in terms of having data on recently contracted loans, in terms of having data on contingent liabilities, right? So that's one. The second will be improved capacity building for our African DMOs. DMOs is debt management offices. So there are a lot of innovations going on in the finance space, and African countries, a lot of them are, or a lot of us are being left behind. For instance, there are innovations in debt contracts called collective action clauses, where agreements reached by a majority of the bondholders are binding on all other bondholders, which makes debt restructuring easier. So that way, an initiative like the Common Framework, rather than take 3.5 years for Zambia, it can take a shorter time period, right? So capacity building, state contingent instruments as well. So basically, we can avert the debt crisis situation that a lot of countries are facing if we are able to tweak debt contracts, right, in such a way that they serve us better. So that's two, capacity building. The third will be governance in terms of development finance more broadly and more specifically on debt. So governance that curb leakages, governance that improves oversight, governance that ensures that the right laws, the right policies, the right strategies are in place, medium-term debt strategies, strategies such as that. So I'll leave it here. Data, capacity building, and governance. That's what success would look like to me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amara. Bringing in Alvin on what success looks like for you, and if you had to pick one thing that you think Africa could prioritize and push for at the G20.
Joining my colleagues and panelists is the push for the reform of the global financial architecture and economic system that is unjust, that has disenfranchised the African continent, that is incompatible with Africa's climate and development aspirations, and that the architecture locks the African continent in cycles of debt, limits our fiscal space, and therefore perpetuating dependency to annex one country. So we should use this opportunity to consolidate positions and demand a new global consensus on equitable development aligned financing mechanism that can open up calls and discussions, like my colleague has said, a framework for comprehensive debt relief. So the AU within the G20 must unite behind a bold, coordinated call for cancellation of climate-related debt and and ensure that a permanent mechanism for debt swap that can redirect payments to resilient development and social protection. Maggie.
Thank you very much, Alvin. I think we will wind up with short, brief remarks from Dr. Hamady on what success looks like for you. And I know you've set timelines in the policy brief, but just as journalists, give us an idea.
No, actually, I'm not going to come back to the timeline. So what I will do is basically just provide something that complement what my two colleagues have said already, because I take ownership of some of the recommendations they made. So when I was working on this policy, I saw four major challenges. One, there is a risk of our participation to be symbolic if we don't build a structure to support our participation, like a secretariat. The second thing I saw as a challenge was the fragmentation that we have in terms of coordination. What will the African Union do? What would the regional economic community do? What would 54 if you take the UN system, or 55 if you take the African Union countries, basically reference. So that fragmentation could be a risk and a challenge. The third one is one that Emma mentioned, which is the issue of limited technical capacity that we have at the moment. It's not just we jumping into the G20 and we are running full speed. So there is a capacity that need to be built for us to be able to participate meaningfully. So so if we don't have strong reform proposals, it will reflect also on the kind of thing that we get there. So we need to really build the capacity to be able to develop evidence-based proposals that we can take to those either working groups, either to the financial Sherpa, to the financial track or the Sherpa, so that we can influence the global agenda. The fourth challenge I saw was also the geopolitical fracture. So at the moment we have the recomposition of the globe in terms of U.S.-China relationship, in terms of G7, BRICS relationship, etc. All those kind of geopolitical tension could sideline basically the continent if we are not very careful. So based on those now, the way I see success is that when we have a structure that will help us to support the process, which is the secretariat that I mentioned in the policy brief. The second is the issue of coordination between those people who are our voices at those high-level platforms, meaning the Sherpa and the finance coordination mechanism. So if those don't speak with one voice, it's going to be really a challenge for us. The third one is basically some of the thematic issues that we have. If we come to a point where our issue on climate, our issue on debt reform, our issue on digital infrastructure, etc., are not mature enough for us to be able to influence the global community, there is no success. For me, I need to see that. So for that to happen now, we have like some precondition. I'm not going to go into those preconditions because they are already discussed at length. So let me just stop at this stage. So strong mechanism as a secretariat structure, a good coordination mechanism, good capacity to do policy-based evidence will take us a long way to influence the global agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamady. Thank you so much, Alvin and Ms. Amara. It's really been a pleasure to have you. And I just want to reiterate that this is a very critical conversation for AfriCatalyst and its partner, the Global Health Strategies, GHS. And when we were putting it together, we were also thinking, okay, we need to understand this further. So as we ask journalists to report the story, we want to be able to give them easy information, knowledge that they can digest and also be able to report to the masses and audiences. At the end of the day, it's about ordinary lives. It's about the hospitals in Kenya. It's about the schools in Zimbabwe. And we've been privileged to have all of journalists joining us. We've had different regions from Zimbabwe in the south, Nigeria, Gambia in the west, Kenya in the east. So we've had representation from across Africa, and it's really brilliant. At this particular moment, I'd like to let you know that we have released our 2 reports. You can find them in the chat. The team has shared those with you, one on the AU in the G20 from presence to influence, and the other on maximizing Africa's influence in the G20. Now, I know there was a lot of feedback and a lot of questions, and Ghana says they are here. Ghana too, thanks for joining. So please feel free to let us know if you may have any other questions. The panelists are also on LinkedIn, on social media. You might want to reach out to them directly, but we'll be posting this on AfriCatalyst and GHS as well. You can reach out to us directly and let us know your thoughts. And this is not the end. This is just the beginning of different dialogues we want to have with the media, because we know that they own our narrative, and it's really been a pleasure to have you all join us. To our panelists, thank you so much for making the time. To the Global Health Strategy, GHS and AfriCatalyst, thank you so much for making the time to put this together. We appreciate, and I would like at this particular moment to end the webinar and say thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye. And you can leave the questions on socials. Back to the director.